We're going to talk about organization structures. Why? Why do we talk about organizations and the way organizations are structured? We're going to have to answer that. We're going to differentiate between project lifecycle and product lifecycle. And we're going to talk about the project management process map and the project management framework and process groups and processes. First of all, let's get Project Management Office out of the way. So these are references. Yeah, actually, Ollie, this is building the whole framework around that. So when we talk about process, you know what I mean when I say process, okay? A PMO, or Project Management Office, is an organizational structure that standardizes project-related governance processes and facilitates the sharing of resources. Okay, standardizes and facilitates sharing. Those are the two things that a PMO does. I did not have a project management office. We never did in our work environment. We called them program management offices because we decided that it would be best if that was a central area for managing programs. There's two sets of roles that a PMO can apply. One, primary, benefits business. Now let's write this down. Other roles benefit project managers. That seems a little weird. Well, let's look at it. Provides policies, methodologies, tools, and templates for managing projects, okay? There's one way that projects are done, and here's how to do it. And here's all the tools and templates. That's called standardization. Business likes standardization. Support and training. You could have a PMO that does this. You notice the word here, they say usually has one or a combination of these. If all the project managers are trained, and I'm a manager, and if my project manager is sick, I can get another project manager who went through the same training and do exactly what my regular project manager does. It's good for business, standardization. PMOs can provide project managers for ongoing projects. It can ensure compliance, not all the times. Sometimes PMOs are advisory. Primary role is of sponsor or portfolio. Well, actually, Ollie, the primary job of PMOs is to create a standard project management environment so that projects can be successful. Not just one project, but all projects. And that's generally what the primary role talks about. What all policy comes under PMO? It depends. Let me say first, hold still, guys, just a second, okay? Niraj asked, what all policies come under PMO? It depends. Like if you're in a healthcare industry, you're going to have an administrative PMO. You're going to have a surgery PMO. You're going to have a hospital. You're going to have a special services PMO. They do this in healthcare. They have PMOs for those, and the policies are going to be different. What we're talking about is beyond that. We're talking about general project management. We're talking about risk and quality and schedule and cost and communications, right? And that's what we're standardizing. The existence of PMO is mandatory? No. I'll talk about that in a second, Vidya. We'll talk about that in a second, okay? PM head PMO. Sometimes PMOs are an executive board, and they're not the project managers. Consulting. It could be, the PMO could be a bunch of project managers, but you mostly want your project managers to be making money, right? So the PMO is going to have different people. Six Sigma templates are different. CMMI are different. Yep, That's right. PMO templates are different. At the end of the day, what is common in Six Sigma, CMMI, or PMP? We'll talk about that. Okay? Actually, let's reword that. Let's reword that very carefully. What makes project management templates different from CMMI, ITIL, 6S templates? Okay? Very well. I can actually speak very well to that. PMO looks over all the projects in a company sometimes. See, this is the problem, Shreya. Sometimes you have a PMO that makes decisions. Sometimes you have a PMO that just gives advice. Let me give you an example of a PMO that just gives advice. But to do that, first of all, we have other roles. Shweta, that's part of it. A PMO can be a governance body for standardization and project management, but actually, let's look at these other roles and it'll expand that concept, okay? Managing interdependencies between projects. Selecting, managing, and deploying shared or dedicated project resources. Terminating projects. Organizing lessons learned. Maintaining this. You know what other roles are? Other roles benefit project managers. Now, let me tell you something, okay? Can we say a bunch of directors or PM? Wait, hold on. I'm going to answer all these questions, okay? First of all, is PMO a stakeholder? If they impact my project or if my project impacts them. Then and only then they are a stakeholder. I'm using the definition. Guys, whenever you want a definition, who's the project manager? Who's the sponsor? You go back to the definition. I'm going to do this only one more time, okay, guys? And I want you to embrace this concept. PMO, a sponsor, if they provide funding, if they authorize the project, then and only then are they a sponsor. I'm going to say sometimes PMOs are sponsors. Sometimes PMOs are stakeholders, but not all the time. Now, let me finish, okay? Let me finish. Other roles. Managing interdependencies, selecting, managing a deployed or shared or dedicated resource, terminating projects, organizing lessons learned, maintaining knowledge, supporting projects through knowledge repositories. Now, let me give you an example. Let me give you an example. Let me give you an example, okay? PMOs have a broad spectrum of formality. NASA. There was a series of white papers on NASA, the National Aeronautic and Space, okay? Hold on. NASA. Directors established a PMO. No PMs used it. PMs met over lunch and shared templates, best practices, and agreed to support each other. Now, which one of these was the PMO? No. No. The PMs working together established the PMO. Because this met the definition of a PMO better than this. Directors can be stakeholders, but guys, if you have an organization that nobody uses, do you really have an organization? Virtual, factual, formal, informal. We're talking about a role. Where does this type of work get done? This is the PMO. Why would PMO sponsor a project? We did this all the time. You know why? Because our vice president would actually give funding to the PMO because the PMO was the central repository for all reporting. And they decided to centralize all the funding for all the work and for all the funding for all the development of the project management tools. It made sense for our work, but it doesn't. Okay, Shreya, I do need to answer your question. So, PMO terminating projects, right? This is not the PMO deciding whether or not to terminate, okay? First of all, the sponsor decides to terminate. Why? Why? Why is it the sponsor's right to terminate early? Why is it the sponsor's right to terminate early, everyone? Money. Now, the PMO sometimes is a good source of doing unique activities. PMO is sometimes a good source of doing unique activities like closing projects down early because a PMO is likely to see more projects than any individual PM. Does that help you? Does that help you? Okay. The big concept you need to take away from this slide, guys. Let me say this again, okay? The big concept to take away from this slide is there is something called a project management office. It always happens. Sometimes the company creates it. Sometimes it's just a bunch of project managers getting together. This happens because we're smart and we want to be more successful and we want to be more efficient. It's going to happen. This is the way human beings work. And this is why we need them. Closing means completing of projects, yes. PMOs can be virtual. PMOs can be formal or informal. A PMO is sharing templates and supporting each other and training each other. That's standardization, isn't it? Like I said, I do not want to tell you what you already know. That's not what's going to prepare you for the exam. What I want to tell you are some things you haven't thought about yet. I'm going to expand your minds in ways you haven't even realized. There's a PMO in your company, but most of the time you heard they send only a report on the project. That's right. They provide advice. Is that the role of the PMO? Sometimes. Sometimes. Let's actually, I want to pull this up to you, okay? Let me clarify this. Hold on, guys. I'm going to pull up the PMBOK. I need to find I need to find the reference. Just a second, just a second, just a second. I'm not going to talk about unethical or ethical, okay? Krishna, it's all about business. Do the benefits exceed the cost? Sometimes it's very diplomatic, but if the benefits do not exceed the cost, is it going to be there for forever? No, it never is. And if it's not a usable solution, you know, it's not attacking people. It's attacking the solution. It's not a good solution. Okay, page 48 of the PMO, right? Here we go. Now, look at this. The PMBOK, hold on guys, the PMBOK breaks PMOs into another set of categories. To give training regarding knowledge or safety is a primary role. It's generally a primary role, Ali, but PMOs can be supportive, consultative. That's no decision making. What you were describing, sending out emails, is probably a supportive PMO. The degree of control provided by the PMO is low. It works primarily as a project repository, okay? You might also have a controlling PMO. Sometimes in companies like fuel and oil, right, gasoline or oil, they have controlling PMOs where you have safety and health compliance that's sort of integrated in with project management. And sometimes a change control board is integrated with the PMO too. That's when you have governance that has to be a big part of your projects. Sometimes PMOs can be directive. And that's where you have project managers assigned to PMOs. In healthcare, they do this from time to time. A lot of healthcare corporations have directive PMOs where they try to centralize their project managers. So PMOs come in all sorts of flavors. They come in all sorts of formality, and they try to solve all sorts of problems. But the best problems PMOs solve: standardization and centralization of project management, and making it easy for project managers to do their job. So if project manager is a primary job inside your company, you're going to have a formal PMO. So in election time, are the voters a sort of PMO? And hence democracy? I don't know. I can't even wrap my head around that question. Okay, let's move on. We got to move through some material here. Okay, so let's get into a really confusing topic: organization structure. We're going to build a model of organizations so that we can talk about project management, right? And we're going to have a spectrum of organizations. And the spectrum's going to run from functional organizations to projectized organizations. Now, these do not exist in reality. These extremes are not real, but they provide a spectrum that we're going to talk about. The definition says, staff is grouped by areas of specialization, and the project manager's limited authority. And each employee reports to a functional manager. Functional manager is a role that we're going to be discussing. Functional organization provides specialization, okay? Provides a function. Can you name some functional organizations? Engineering, HR, research and development, manufacturing. Okay? Some functions generate money directly. Most functions support those functions. Okay? Most functional organizations don't make money. Sales makes money, but most functions are support functions. Okay? Now, if you're a PM in a support function, you have less authority than the functional manager. Yep, finance and accounting, marketing. If you're a project manager, you're going to have less authority than the functional manager, right? And the functional manager has authority to tell you to close down your project for a while in order to get your other work done, right? Projects are not, see, this is it. Exactly, okay? Now, we'll talk more about this, okay? Now, projectized organizations. The organization's resource mostly work on projects, not functions, and the project manager has primary control. Okay? Projects are the primary output, and the PM has high authority. Can anybody tell me a type of business that looks like that? Services, consulting, IT within a company, right? Okay. Yeah, it's funny. This is where they have a high authority. Do you know why project managers have high authority inside of a projectized organization? They are the ones generating revenue directly. And that means the functions are subservient to them, right? Engineering, finance, legal, support the PM. You agree? Isn't this beautiful? It makes a lot of sense, right? So if you're a project manager in a functional organization, you're going to have low authority. But if you're in consulting, you're going to have a high authority because who is closer to revenue? If you look inside of a company, the organization and the leader closer to revenue has higher authority. It always works that way. It has to, because they have to have the ability to make critical business decisions. This is not bad. This is not good. This is just the nature of project management, because some projects are needed to change functional organizations. Some projects are needed to make money. The person who is technically strong is made the functional manager, and the person who is non-technical is made the project coordinator. You correct? Well, sort of, Milesh. Think about this. Actually, we need to talk about this, okay? Let's move to this slide. See, when you have a functional organization, the person on top has the authority over everybody in their organization. So that means the functional manager has to be an expert. Okay? They are the technical expert within that functional organization. Head of engineering, head of sales, they're an expert in sales. Head of finance, they have to be that way because they own the performance reviews of those people, right? That's not the same in project management. Project management's different, isn't it? Now, what's nice about functions is that people stay within them for 2 years to 5 years, which means they become experts. I want experts on my project, so I need functional organizations around them. Okay, so in reality, there's no such thing as a projectized organization. In reality, there's no such thing as a functional organization. They're all matrix. Strong matrix means I'm a consulting organization, but I have finance, accounting, and legal to support me. Weak matrix means I'm highly functional, but there is some project management structure. And that's primarily where internal projects are. There is a model that says balanced, okay? And in balanced matrix, it's where the functional manager and the project manager have equal authority. And we'll talk more about that later. Now, let's get these things straight, okay? Project manager has leadership, management, authority, and responsibility of a project, right? Functional manager has leadership, management, authority, and responsibility of a function. And we're going to learn later, project manager needs to negotiate with the functional manager for resources. So, Sweta, is functional similar to weak matrix? Weak matrix is what real life is all about, where you have functional organizations that take advantage, and let's actually say this. Weak matrix is where functional organizations take advantage of project management to apply controlled change, okay? And a strong matrix is where project management is the primary source of revenue and functional organizations support the PM, okay? That's the best way to think of it. Now, composite. Composite organization. We'll talk about balance later. I said that, Shreya, okay? We'll talk about that later. Composite organization, where the PM interacts with all three levels of organization. The workers, the decision makers, and the executives. Okay? That's what we call a composite. I was mostly in a composite organization. I had to work up and down the spectrum of hierarchy inside my company. Let's take a break. When we get back from our break, I'm actually going to go into great detail. I have a lot more discussion on these, and then we'll get into the rest of our material, okay? Okay. Is it safe to say in a matrix organization, the manager or functional manager has consultants? No, 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 not necessarily. We'll talk about that. Welcome back. From your comments, I know that I'm in an audience of project managers. Thank you for making me feel so warm. That's great. You guys are engaged and you have to know the answers. This is what I expect of somebody in your position right now. So, first of all, let's see here. Which type of organization culture is most common? I hate to say this, Shweta. Yes, it really depends. Let's see here. Support number, I'll look that up. Weak matrix is most common scenario in IT. Sometimes. Can I give examples? Yes, and I think it's better if we give examples, okay? So a strong matrix, example. PricewaterhouseCoopers, where every PM has their own attorney purchasing manager, and resource manager, okay? There you go. Admin. Let's do admin instead. Let's just have an admin. There. See where the functions support the project manager? That's indicative of a strong matrix. Weak matrix. Let's see here. I don't want to do IT because it's sort of strange. Let's do engineering, where the engineering manager handles most critical projects and delegates other project management to their staff, okay? We'll talk about that in a second. That's basically what functional organizations look like, okay? Now, you have to be careful with this. IT is a strange creature. As an organization, it sometimes is weak matrix, right? Because why? IT cannot be around this week. We're doing a product launch, right? Do you agree? As an organization, it sometimes is strong matrix. Now, this happens. Have you ever heard of resource pooling? This is cost control of staff when projects are very critical to work. And this sometimes happens, right? Resource pooling is indicative of strong matrix. When you pool resources, you're saying they're only working on projects. And there's reasons why IT does this. There was a big movement in the early 2000s, and the IT was seen as a drain on money. IT doesn't make any money for the company. Well, sort of it does. But so IT had to change the company's perception. And most IT organizations, well, inside of a company, a lot of IT organizations became consulting organizations for the rest of the company. And they became highly projectized. And that way, at the end of the year, they could say, okay, we didn't make any money, we didn't profit, but guess what? We had all these ceilings, all these savings, okay? That's still a benefit. Yep. So you see what happens here, right? There are a lot of things. Let's go deeper into it, and I'll talk about balanced matrix in a bit. Now, let's talk about functional organizations, but let's talk about weak matrix. So I already said that weak matrix is where the engineering manager will delegate. We'll talk, guys, can we actually stay on task here so I can get through this? I will talk about type matrix later, okay? It doesn't show up on the exam much anymore at all, but I can speak to it. So, the functional manager manages the most critical projects. And in a weak matrix also, sometimes you don't even have a PM. There's something called an expediter. An expediter is where a functional manager says, you know what, this project is not that critical. I just need somebody to keep an eye on it, right? All it is communications and tracking. That's all it is. No decision making, right? That's what an expediter is. A coordinator is limited decision making. You may see expediter or coordinator on the exam. And that's where you have somebody with a little bit of decision making, like an entry-level manager, right? The functional manager knows this is a tricky project, but they don't have time to do it. So what are they going to do? They're going to delegate that project to one of their lower level managers. And that lower level manager can make some of the simple decisions, but when they get in a tight spot, it's expected they're going to come back to the functional manager. And if you have expediters or coordinators, and in one of my marketing groups, we have these. This is very indicative of a weak matrix environment. So we talked about functional organizations being a great source of resources. Let's talk about projectized organizations. Even though they don't exist, we can think of them as highly projectized, like strong matrix too. This is where resources are aligned to projects and they don't have a function. You have pooling in a projectized environment. Project execution becomes easier because the dedicated resources, right? You don't have a functional manager saying, Tim, I need my team back. Roles of the resources cease once the project's completed and resources return to the pool. So this is the problem with consulting. If you're on the bench, you're not making money for the company, but you're still pulling a paycheck. It's a very tense environment to work in. And so you often become a salesperson for yourself trying to find work. As a project manager, not just team members. The other problem is this last bullet. Functional specialization is limited. In true consulting, you have a bunch of generalists. They're all experts, but they're general experts in technology, database, right? They're not specific. If you need a specific expertise in consulting, you're going to have to outsource that skill. Or you're going to have to bring in training to train your team. And we did that a lot. And the client has to pay for both of those. Now, let's go to our matrix. Resources report to functional managers and are aligned to project managers. So the resources have dual roles. The resources have two managers, too. Optimal utilization of resources and functional specialization, right? You get the best of all worlds. You get specialists actually taking advantage of their specialization. It comes at a cost. It's complex and it's time consuming. In a project organization, we have expediter, coordinator. In a projectized organization, you probably don't. You have true project management. Now, let's talk about a balanced matrix, because we haven't talked about that yet. Why the projectized organization doesn't exist in reality? Because in consulting, a PM can't function without finance, legal, purchasing. Do you agree with me? That's why I say it. Now, a balanced matrix where the functional manager and the project manager have equal authority. Okay. Yeah, they can slow things down, but they slow things down for good reasons. Okay, so the functional manager and the project manager have equal authority. Okay, let's do this. Product manager is not a PMBOK term, but let's define it as a manager responsible for the creation, deployment, and life cycle management of a product. Okay, that's the definition that we're going to go by together. A product manager is responsible for the creation, deployment, and life cycle management of not, yeah, sort of, you could say that, but the product manager must interact with all the functions in order to get their management done, right? And the functions are responsible for supporting the product manager, okay? So it's an equal relationship. So you can think of the product manager. If you have a product manager like this in manufacturing, that's very indicative of balanced matrix. Yeah, and that's it. Guys, when I say functional manager, when I say product manager, when I say project manager, these are roles. They're not job titles. They're not people. Right. And a product manager can be a program manager. A product manager can be a project manager. A product manager can be a portfolio manager. And in fact, usually a product manager is all of those. In your organization, you have one product but many, many projects. Yep, that's right. That's right. What's a program manager? Somebody who manages groups of projects. Ali? We talked about programs yesterday. Okay, so in review, functional organizations are great because they have clear defined career paths, a more flexible workforce. You only have one manager, and they say exactly where it goes. But projects are often downplayed, and that's all right. There's always a business reason why project management may not have that great of a voice inside of functional organizations. You have to expect that. In a projectized environment, better communication within projects, more loyalty to project goals because you don't have to return the resources back to their functions, but you may end up with less than 100% utilization of your resources. And when the project's over, no defined roles. And it's not a great place if you want to get deep expertise. A matrix is a combination of the best and worst of both worlds. Better coordination, maximum utilization of resources. That comes with higher potential for conflict and greater communication complexity. The problems between a functional manager and project manager are not generally because, they don't like each other, they don't agree with each other. The problems between a functional manager and project manager exist because lack of communication, lack of roles of responsibility, and we have control over that. What type of organization is, okay, boy, Vinny, I'm going to have to dissect it. That's a good question, but I am going to have to dissect that. Okay, now let's compare project life cycle to product life cycle. A project life cycle lasts from the initiation of project to the closure, right? So we start the project's approved, we complete the project, and then we hand over what we're done, right? That's a project. A product life cycle can start here, and that could be the first project which creates the product, right? But then what do you have? Well, you release it into the market or you put it in operations. That's another project. You want to change it a little bit. You want to do marketing campaigns. Each one of these are projects, right? Product life cycles can require or spawn many projects over their life. And in fact, there's always one project at the end of a product life cycle. We call it withdrawal from market or obsolescence, right? Take it away from market or make it obsolete. So product life cycle is how companies manufacture products, but projects is how we change products. Our sales and marketing and maintenance projects or operations, they're both. They're operations, but if they need to make changes, they use projects. Remember, we use projects to administer change inside a business. So they are operations, but they take advantage of projects. So for questions such as above, we would be confused whether it's a weak matrix or a functional organization. We're going to look at that, Vinny. I have some questions, and when I send you the quiz, there's 2 or 3 questions that just play on that, and we'll talk about that, okay? Now, this last bullet is not just interesting, but you should understand what it means. Let's take the 2 last bullets. Product life cycles are long. It can spawn many projects, right? Where a project life cycle is shaped by 2 things: control needs of the performing organization or the organization's preference defined in their project execution methodology. Let's dissect this. This is very important for us to understand. What does control needs of the organization mean? If you use contracts, you have to use an attorney, right? If you purchase something, you have to use procurement. Finance will tell you how you need to control your budget, right? All of those we call control needs. You have to follow this. We also have organization preference. Let me give you a couple examples and you'll understand what this means. Blizzard, right? World of Warcraft, right? What do they use? They use a software development life cycle because they develop software, right? Now, that means we release our product at 70% complete. They do. When it's 70% done, they put it out the door. It's called a beta release, right? And then they use the interaction with the consumer to finish developing the product. That's the way software gets created. Let's do something different. Let's pick on Audi now, okay? They use a product development life cycle. We release our product at 100% complete, right? You can't really beta test a car. You can do prototypes, but a prototype is not a beta test. A prototype is still 100% complete. Organizational preference is selected by the primary product the company makes. How does that company make their money? That's the organization preference. And you can actually go into any corporation and look at their product life cycle and their project life cycle and say, oh, you're a manufacturing company. Oh, you're a sales company. Product development life cycle. Okay, we have to be careful with this, Sweda. First of all, this is a good example, everyone. Your work environment uses terms in a very specific way. You've created a culture, and your terminology represents your culture. I'm going to try to define these, but it may not be exactly how it's defined within your work environment. Let me try this, okay?